What's up YouTube? This is PN Collector here with another deck of the month for March, and it's going to be brought to you by Chainburn. And this pretty much has been a deck that's been pretty hyped up right now. A lot of people aren't exactly sure how the deck works or how it's built. So I'm going to show you a little bit of my build and how everything works. And if you have any questions or comments, just will be in the and just let me know. And I'll go ahead and show you the deck right now. One Morphing Jar. Pretty much, if you use up your hand, Morphing Jar will help out the whole situation, especially since you do set a lot in this deck. 2 Lava Golems. Lava Golems in here to help create an additional chain, take 1000 damage from your opponent, and then help build off from that. And especially if you play against Black Wings and they use Icarus attack, which can really hurt this deck in the end phase. You get rid of those creatures and you drop a Lava Golem, and it pretty much takes away that Icarus being viable, and from there you can set it freely and then wait till your opponent's turn to chain everything again. So it's a really good card. 3 Zero Gardnas. Zero Gardna is another monster that pretty much shuts down the battle phase for your opponent. You can sacrifice this card during either player's turn, and during that turn, monsters are not destroyed in battle, nor do you take any battle damage from the battle. So that pretty much helps protect your life points and any damage from any of your creatures that you might have on the board, and buys you an extra turn. And that really helps, especially if your opponent will play Book or Brain Control. You just sacrifice the creature, and for the turn the effect will be inactive. So they won't be able to come at you with any big monsters or any threats to begin with. And then of course, 3 Battle Fodders. If your opponent will attack you directly, you just play it from your hand and end the battle phase. Now what's amazing about this too, most players don't know that if you do drop Battle Fodder, your opponent cannot torrential tribute your creatures. Reason being is because the last thing that happened with Battle Fodder is ending the battle phase. So your opponent cannot play torrential against it, and it really helps too for some situations, but the only thing is that he gets hurt to oppression, but he helps an additional chain and protect your life points, just like Zero Gardna would. Alright, onto the spells. 1 Mystical Space Typhoon. In case some people do Tech Decrees or even Royal Oppressions on your Battle Fodder, it helps get rid of those threats. 2 Chain Strikes is what the deck's based off of, Chainburn. The higher the chain is, the more damage it does, times 400, and this really helps just for extra kicks. Now for the draw engines, for the traps, be 3 Accumulated Fortunes. If you play this in a chain 4 or higher, you're able to draw 2 cards. Now what most people don't understand is how you can play 2 of these, or any chain card for that matter, 2 in the same chain. What it's ruled is that the card is not technically activated on the chain yet, and that's why it allows you to draw an additional 2 cards. If you had 2 accumulateds and like 3 other cards, you're able to draw 4 cards because the other accumulated hasn't been activated yet in the chain, especially if they're chained right off of each other. But this is just one of the draw engines for it. 3 Jar of Greeds, additional draw card and help support with the chain. 3 Reckless Greeds, same thing for the Jar of Greeds. It helps additional draw phase, and it helps you get further into other cards you'll need in your deck for burn and that. 3 Legacy of Yadas, just like Jar of Greed, helps you draw further into your deck and help with other combos. Now for the stall versions of the cards, 2 Wabokus. I know Gladiator Beasts are still around right now, but Waboku still helps against especially other decks that do use more than one monster they need to put on the board that's not a Gladiator Beast, so it does help, especially if you're going to take a lot of damage from one turn. It really does help, especially since you can chain it as well. 2 Threatening Roars. Some people prefer 3. I have another card that I use in mind for this deck. Threatening Roar is really good because you can also chain, and it helps end the battle phase, and like I said, it adds to the 15 cards already that end the battle phase in this deck. Next up is my tech for this deck is 2 Scrubbed Raids. Now what a lot of people don't know about Scrub Raid is that it's actually one of the few cards where you can chain a trap card, like say Legacy of Yada. I can chain Legacy of Yada when you're attacking me, and then activate Scrub Raid and send the Legacy of Yada to the graveyard, and it ends the battle phase and I still draw a card, because it's ruled that Scrub Raid will still allow other cards to trigger within the same window as best they can. Since Legacy of Yada says I draw a card even though I've sent it to the graveyard, and end the battle phase, you would think the timing would be missed, but it still allows it to go through. And that's why Scrub Raid's amazing, because it can either stall for even further push for game, or it can help you add more resources and pretty much annoy your opponent. And that's why it's actually one of the few cards that I think was ignored from Yusei's Duelist pack. Next up, the burn parts. 3 Secret Barrels. Eventually, with your opponent not being able to attack you or do much damage to you, they're going to have a lot of cards that are going to stay on the board. So the more cards, the better, because you can do 200 times the amount, and it helps further burn your opponent for most of their life points to drop them further down to 0. 2 Just Desserts. Some people prefer 3, but I think 2 is enough because in the fact that your opponent always doesn't have monsters, and especially now with everyone synchro summoning, it doesn't really do as much as it used to do. So, especially since Ojama Trio is at 1, it doesn't exactly allow more burn to happen. But it's still good in my opinion just to at least have 2. 2-dimensional walls. Pretty much, if your opponent's going to attack you directly, this is a full-blown hit for them, and it's like another Magic Cylinder for the deck. I actually don't run Magic Cylinder, only in the fact that it targets, and just in case cards that do manipulate things do target. I chose not to run it and tried Dimensional Walls better. And it's actually been more successful too, especially if you give your opponent a Lava Golem and they attack you and they take 3,000 and they've already taken 1,000 for the turn. It helps push, especially for a lot of those games. Except the single tech Ojama Trio. If this was still at 3, the deck would really be hard to beat, especially with running 3 copies of Just Desserts for an easy 15. And this is the reason why this card is at 1. It manipulates too much. Even though they're level 2 tokens, it doesn't exactly do as much as it used to because of the tuner engine now. But if the card ever went back to 3 or even 2, it'd really help bring this deck to even further popularity. 1 chain detonation. What this does is if you actually activate it on a chain link 2 or more, 2 or 4, you get to return it back to your deck. But if it's 4 or higher, you get to add the card back to your hand, and you still do inflict 500 for either effect. So it really helps to say if you have 3 cards face down, let alone 4, and you chain all of them, and on the 4th chain you chain this, you deal 500, and the card will go back into your hand. And that's actually the reason why chain detonation's in here, just to help further increase a little bit of damage and activate the chain even more. And then the last card copy is Ceasefire. This basically replaced my 3rd copy of Just Desserts because there's a lot of effect monsters floating around the game now, and the fact is this can be chained to both players' sides of the board, so it can add up more. So that's why I feel that Ceasefire is actually one of the few cards that should be in the deck because it actually can do a lot more damage than even Just Desserts itself. Alright, and then let me go ahead and show you guys the deck again. Here's Ceasefire, Chain Detonation, and pretty much, if you guys had any questions about anything or how this deck works, go ahead and free to PM me. Or if you guys have any suggestions or ideas, go ahead and leave them in the comments. And please rate and subscribe and tell me what you guys think. And this is pretty much a very low-cost deck. There really isn't much you have to spend on it. I mean, maybe the only thing would probably be the Battle Fodders at most. But this deck is relatively cheap and it's pretty much, I would say, like at least under 120. Only thing is expensive is pretty much just the Battle Fodders. But if you guys have any questions or anything, or you'd like to leave any comments, please rate and subscribe. And this is pretty much the deck of the month for March, my chain burn. And if you guys have any other questions, just hit me up and let me know. Alright, this is PN Collector signing out.